wait a minute, I'm starting the meeting, admitting people. Let's see, I see, it must be speaker mode because he's got one slide with a bunch of thumbnails across the bottom.
And then hopefully now what you see is the real slide.
No.
Interesting. I just swapped the displays backwards and forwards.
Hello, everybody. We'll be starting the webinar in a few minutes. Duncan and I are just having fun with technology.
Yeah. No, I think this works. I think people can.
I only see like a little tiny thumbnail of the
bottom, yeah. But I believe that I'm sharing my screen with the presentation.
Nope.
Excellent. Okay.
You want to stop sharing and I'll share?
Yeah. Okay. Sure. Yeah. I've stopped. Hey everyone, we are just sorting out some audio-visual opportunities, and then we're going to get going in a little while. Just as a note of thanks, we had fantastic questions submitted in advance today, so that is really wonderful and has helped us massively in structuring the presentation. Carter, thanks so much for sharing your screen. So I'm gonna keep an eye on people as they come into the lobby, and then I'm gonna just introduce today, and then we'll get on with introducing ourselves. Yeah. So just as a note of clarification, if you're here, this is a webinar sponsored by SageCircle and by the Association for Analyst Relations Partnerships. I'm Duncan Chapple. I'm here with Carter Lusher. We're going to be introducing ourselves in a few moments. As I was saying, thanks very much for submitting your questions. I should also say this webinar is being recorded, so maybe if we slice the bit off the start of the recording, then we'll put that on the SageCircle website. But also with your credentials for this webinar, you should be able to return to this place and see a recording a few moments after the recording has ended. So you don't need to wait for the replay. You should be able to just come in now. Carter, if we just click down to one slide, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Duncan, and welcome everybody. We're looking forward to a really fun webinar today because primarily we're going to be talking about your questions. But first, let's answer a question about me. Carter Lusher, a lot of you already know me, but for new folks that have never interacted with me before, I've been in the analyst game for over a third of a century, and I've been on all sides of the table, from being an IT manager at insurance company where I was a client of Gartner, a Gartner analyst. I co-founded SageCircle. I went back to being an analyst, and then have been, bouncing around various AR positions over the years. So kind of a unique perspective on the analyst game and the analyst landscape. Now, I'm going to take a point of privilege here and say that both myself and Duncan, we're looking for new opportunities. So if you hear of any interesting jobs, or if you would like to engage either of us, now we're separate, we're doing this together, but professionally, we're separate. Feel free to reach out to us if you happen to have our email or as a message on LinkedIn. Over to you, Duncan.
Fantastic. Thanks so much. As you can see from this beautiful diagram, thank you, Carter. I'm somebody who has had a background working as an industry analyst at what is now Omdia, was then Ovum. Since then, I've been working as an analyst relations consultant for part of that time in-house at Deloitte, then for public relations agencies, And then more recently in joining SageCircle, where I've got a gig for the next few months at least, maybe longer, we'll see what happens, but working on their analyst attitude survey and analyst advocacy study. Alongside that, I'm also co-director of the Analyst Observatory at the University of Edinburgh, which is a research centre that is looking at the impact of industry analysts on the markets around them. Let's move on just to say a few words about our sponsor, SageCircle. So, as people may know, Carter founded SageCircle a couple of dozen years ago. Dave Ecker and Chris German have been helping us to build the company over the last few decades, and really to focus on how analyst relations is transforming, how it's trying to drive more value to sales, how it's trying to inform this better decision making inside organizations, and how it is shifting perceptions through the whole market. Just a little update on what we are working on at the moment on the next slide. SageCircle's activity is really based around 3 key activities. There's the analyst advocacy study, where we are asking analysts how they feel about the vendors, how they feel about the analyst relations teams that they're working with. We conduct spoken word audits. That's where I've kind of reconnected with SageCircle over the last few years. I've been working at a public relations agency, which SageCircle hired to help them with these spoken word audits. And there's the SageScore diagnostic, which is a kind of test that you can take to evaluate how well your analyst relations is performing against your peers. There are a few things that we are rolling out this quarter. A program of coaching for analyst relations teams that is based in the data that we're collecting through our surveys. Live and recorded training to help analyst relations teams to build out their capabilities. And then together with the University of Edinburgh, we're organising an AR forum. This will be the 11th year we've organised the AR forum. This year it will be in Edinburgh on June the 27th, and that will be a hybrid event that you can join online. And then there are some other things that you might be interested in. A critical briefing accelerator, where we're helping organisations to prepare for key briefings. Membership programs, so allowing analyst relations people to connect together. Actually, in that respect, I'm also helping set up some mastermind classes, mastermind groups for analyst relations managers who want to engage in kind of peer discussion over particular pressing problems. And then competitive scorecards, again, to help people to better understand how their company is faring with analyst advocacy compared with its competitors. Just one last thing I should mention is our next webinar, which is coming up at the end of this month. Which is on our next slide. So my colleague Ian Scott and I are doing a webinar on the 29th of February, looking at 5 key analyst relations bottlenecks. So over the last few years, I've been interviewing quite large numbers of analysts, week in, week out, interviewing them to work out how they feel about the analyst relations teams that they're working with. There are many things that AR teams do right or get wrong, but there are 5 things that really stand out, which are bottlenecks that prevent organizations from moving forward to the next level of analyst advocacy. So Ian and I will be speaking about that. There's the bit.ly link at the bottom of the screen there, AR bottlenecks, and I'll repeat that later on in case you want to get some more insight into what we are doing. So with that, we've got the topic of the webinar, and Carter, we've got this slide which I think is a reveal that kind of opens up our 4 key elements here. Do you want to kind of just move straight through to this recap of Q1? I mean, obviously of Q4. Obviously, the great thing about Q4 is that we have not just this trajectory over the last few months, but then the whole year to reflect on as well.
Great. And rather than going through a lot of different sections with a lot of background information, we're just going to do a quick recap so that we can immediately get into the questions, because the questions that came in were great. I really want to compliment everybody in the community for participating by throwing in their questions and observations and such like that. And I see that we have 109 attendees already on the call, so this is fantastic. So one of the ways that I look at future influence of the analysts is based on their advisory contract value. Now, remember, the advisory contract shows, and this is from a subscription business model, shows here's the ability of people to call up the analysts, ask questions. This is the ability of clients to look at all of Gartner research and such like that. And my thesis for why I look at the number of sales reps and the contract value is that, the more sales reps you have, i.e. in this case, the analyst firms, the more doors you're knocking on, the more clients you get, and thus generating more inquiries. And the more inquiries that an analyst is doing, provides them with lots of great research, but it's also a way for them to influence the IT managers who they're talking with. Now, if you look at this chart, since 2013, both Gartner's number of sales reps and the amount of contract value has been going up and up and up to the point to where, and this is just Gartner for technology sales, the legacy Gartner that owns the Magic Quadrants part of the research. This doesn't include Gartner business sales, which is the old CEB expanded upon. And we need to talk about at some point in the future, in a future LinkedIn post or something, the role of the CEB legacy on influence. But anyway, so here we see Gartner, growing their number of sales reps and growing their contract value, which means that they have more and more advisory seats. In the last earnings call, Gartner explicitly said for the first time that 75% of their contract value are end users. So this is all about the end users and the influence on buying. On the other hand, Forrester has been stagnating for a long time. And of course, that we know in 2023, as part of their transition to Forrester Decisions, they actually cut a significant number of their sales reps. So frankly, from my point of view, Forrester is going to be shrinking influence, at least for the near term, until they reignite sales and contract value. And oh, by the way, I've gotten pushback on my thesis from folks, including former Forrester analysts, who said, sales reps don't matter, it's the quality of the research. That's what drives influence. And my snarky remark would be, well, then if it's the quality of the research that's driving contract value and influence and not the sales reps, that must mean that Forrester's influence is going down. But then that's just me being snarky. Now, my focus is always on contract value because that's a nice, neat number that both Forrester and Gartner reports. And I've got, the summary tables, which you can find lots of details in the LinkedIn post. But what I never really talked about before, and I think it's important to bring up, is conference events and conference attendees. And here, Gartner is just blowing Forrester away. So in 2023, Gartner held 47 events, over 75,000 attendees, versus Forrester's pitiful 11 events and less than 5,000 attendees. And remember, people go to events of the analyst firms to learn, to interact with the analysts. Of course, one-on-ones are a huge part of the experience of going to a Gartner event, for going to a Forrester event. And so just the sheer numbers of attendees at events indicate that, hey, there's a lot of influence going on here, and we need to do a better job of trying to categorize or capture what that influence is. But again, it's not just advisory contract, parenthetically inquiries. Events also drive influence as well. Duncan, this is a really great chart. Tell us about it.
So this is a chart from the Analyst Value Survey, which people might know is an annual survey that asks people who use analyst research about which firms they use, what do they use them for, and then which of these different services do they find to be the most valuable. And what this chart tries to show is a picture of roughly how many analyst firms is the average person using, and then how many of those are part of contract value. So one of the things that analyst relations people correctly focus on is face-to-face interaction at events and spoken word interactions through inquiry and advisory sessions. But of course, that access is for customers. You know, not everybody who is involved in technology buying is in an organization that subscribes to an analyst firm, and not everybody who's in a buying center at an organization that subscribes to an analyst firm has that advisory access. So when we look at the people who are on the enterprise side, who take the analyst value survey, we see that on average they are consuming a little bit more than 6 firms during the course of the year, and that their organization will typically subscribe to 3 or 4 of those. So if we think of these people using 6 firms, that is 6 different streams of influence coming into the buying center, only about half of these are in organizations that have got a subscription connected to that access. And of course, even if, for example, you work for an organization that has got a Gartner subscription, there's still a very good chance that you yourself might not have an advisory seat. You might not be accessing research through a research seat. Your organization might subscribe to Gartner or Forrester or IDC, but actually you might be accessing reprints licensed from a recent reprints licensed by a vendor, or free content being given away as a content marketing initiative. So if we look at all of that influence, what we see is that actually subscription is only half of the story. And in fact, Gartner's research is just 7% of all of that research being used. Now, what we have to remember is that the later in the decision-making cycle, we're more likely to see these advisory interactions, these face-to-face interactions and spoken word interactions online. But it's only a small part of the pattern. So even if we're seeing Gartner and Forrester's revenues shifting and under pressure, that doesn't necessarily mean that their influence is declining. Quite the opposite. We're seeing buying centers that are more susceptible to influence because they are under more pressure, they're more anxious, they have to justify themselves more, they're reaching out more to access other forms of information to back up their decision making. So that's just an important footnote, that revenue is not exactly the same as influence.
So if it's not inquiries, because not everybody is a client of the analyst, is there other forms of influence? And of course, the answer is reprints. You know, every vendor that's on this call spends money, you know, purchasing reprints for either a Gartner Magic Quadrant or a Forrester Wave or a MarketScape or an MGI 360 ratings or any of the other, you know, sort of big rock ones. And this is just something I whipped together this morning, and I have no clue about this 12 million search results of the term Gartner Magic Quadrant 2023. But what it does show is that there's a vast difference between, you know, the number of hits for the Forrester Wave versus the Gartner Magic Quadrant. And remember, most buyers of technology that use analyst research use it through reprints. So again, an indicator of influence via reprints as well. Now, one of the reasons why I think that Forrester's numbers are so low on this particular Google search is that they're very erratic when it comes to the publication of their waves. Gartner's a machine. Every year, you know, every 11, 12, or 13 months, they're going to upgrade that or update a Magic Quadrant. And actually, we got some questions about that later as well. And But Forrester is very erratic. It could be 2 years, which is their stated goal, but it could be 2.5 years, it could be 3 years. And so as an indication that, this erratic impact means that fewer vendors are doing a wave reprint, which means they're doing less and less promotion of the waves. So the brand of the Forrester wave and Forrester's influence sort of fades over time. Here is a comment from our good friend Chris that talked about, their digital commerce wave is late because of multiple secondary research topics covered by the core analysts. And that was certainly my experience as well. They're just spreading the peanut butter too thin. So stay tuned. We're going to do a poll on LinkedIn that asks about your experience between wave refreshes and why Forrester is saying that they're doing that. So again, stay tuned for that poll on LinkedIn. So let's get to your questions. So here, what we did was we took all of the questions and started to pull them together into categories. So you can see that we have a lot of questions here on analyst influence, but let's sort of spread these out over slides to make them easier to work on. So the first category is how can we measure analyst influence? Duncan, you want to take the first bullet point and I'll respond as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So the important thing to remember is that analysts create a lot of value, but different analyst firms really differ in their ability to capture part of the value that they are creating. When we look at value from the analyst value survey, for example, there's a very big difference in value for money. Some organizations really feel that that this analyst firm is picking them up and squeezing every penny. And, in other situations, they feel that they're getting very good value for money. So many analyst firms are creating a lot of value for buyers, for others in the industry, but they're not really extracting that. So is revenue the same as influence? I mean, hopefully there would be a connection, but I think what Carter has shown, honestly, is that the number one driver of revenue is hiring salespeople. And if you have an analyst firm that doesn't really believe that thinks that if you're just writing better research, then the world is going to be a path to your door, then you're probably not going to generate the kind of revenues that reflect the influence that you have. The other thing that has to be said about influence is that if you look at influence on decision making, I mean, the numbers that Carter just showed about magic quadrants and Forrester waves show this incredible diffusion by vendors. Yeah, so vendors are very often sponsoring or licensing content. That is, in fact, the dominant form of information, of third-party information, being used by people in buying centers in order to generate awareness of vendors. So that is massively influential, absolutely decisive, and it's largely not being monetized by the analyst firms except through reprints. And buyers want to see information that is as specific as possible to the problems that they have. And that's why they are searching not just for Gartner and Forrester, but using 6, 7, maybe more in some cases, analysts. So revenue is absolutely not the same as influence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I completely agree with that. And actually, let's jump to the next 2 bullet points, because they're sort of the same in terms of how to evaluate the buying impact of the individual analysts, and can you show Gartner's and Forrester's influence on the market. What I always like to say is that your mileage may vary. Your mileage depending on what market you're in and what the analysts are actually covering in your market. So what's really important is for each individual vendor to be talking to its prospects and to its customers and asking them questions like, hey, where do you get information about making purchasing decisions? Are you using the analysts? Which analyst firms are you using? Are you reading the analyst research? Are you talking to the analysts? This could be part of a win-loss analysis. I've worked with several competitive intelligence teams or win-loss teams, depending on the vendor I was working at, and inserted these into the scripts. And by the way, it's not just the analysts. It's also the review sites. So you should be asking, as part of where do you get the information? Where do you get advice? Are you reading the review sites, whether it's G2 or Trust Radius or PeerSpot or Peer Insights or somebody else? So, this particular webinar happens to be focused on the analysts and their influence, but we shouldn't be discounting the influence of the review sites. But again, your mileage may vary. So you need to be asking your prospects and your customers where they turn to for advice and influence. Duncan?
Yeah, I think if you think about it, there are really two key factors here. There's the relevance of the analyst to the questions that the buyer is asking, and then their amplification. How likely is somebody in a buying center to come across that analyst's insight? That's really what amplification produces for you. And so there are many factors involved there. When we're helping people to prioritize these analysts, very often you want to speak to a smart analyst who really gets your market and understands what you're doing. But the sad reality is that an idiot with amplification, not an idiot, but somebody who's less relevant, perhaps less perceptive, but has more amplification, it may well be heard more by your buyer. And that's especially the case when you get into particular niche markets, into areas where you've got analysts that have something like a captive market. For example, if you're consuming research in English, there's a huge amount of research available in English. But if you're working in Chinese, in Arabic, in German, in Spanish, in French, there's an awful lot of research that is not really available in these languages. So you get channeled towards the people who are writing in your language. They've got a lot of amplification in those particular buyer markets. So as Carter says, it's all about the audience. That's why win-loss analysis is so important. Very often people focus on who are the analysts who they hear about in their deals, and sometimes that might only give you an idea of who is influencing the deals that you win, who's influencing the customers who you get to speak to or use as reference customers. But actually what's more important is who's influencing the people who say no to you. And your salespeople often won't have deep conversations with those. It's only the win-loss analysis that is going to show you that. And I think in a way that bridges to this point about Gartner versus Forrester's influence in the market. That's going to massively vary from markets to markets. And very often, imagine if you've got a great relationship with Gartner and Gartner is your advocate, you're going to be swimming more in the part of the market that is subject to Gartner's influence. And the rest of that market might be less valuable for you. It might be harder for you to enter into it, and vice versa. Again, that's why having kind of neutral information, solid facts, information collected from your target audiences, not just from your salespeople, not just from your colleagues, is going to give you a better idea about how this influence is made material in your particular market.
Okay, great. Let's move on to the next. How influential is Gartner? I love this first question. Has Gartner gotten too big to deliver a common, coherent view of the technology market? When we were chatting yesterday about the questions, Duncan, you had some great insights about this one. Why don't you start?
Yeah, I think you can tell that. Okay, no, I'm not gonna imagine who this question has come from, but I think it's vastly overstated how important it is to have a coherent view of the technology market, like the market actually as a whole, because to a certain degree there really isn't a technology market. I mean, there are many technology markets. They're highly disparate, and the value of having a kind of world concept, a total overview of this market. I mean, obviously that's very valuable if you're in a senior market forecasting role at IDC, but I don't think for many practitioners this question really matters. What is probably more significant for Gartner, for example, is that it's pivoting and paying attention to the things that its customers are concerned about. Yeah, I think it's completely reasonable to not have a coherent view, but to have a completely uneven view where you're spending a lot of time and energy on the things that people are asking you about in inquiry, and you're really not asking people. Like there's probably more functional deployments of Apache printer servers than there are of generative AI, but no one's really worried about Apache, and people are really concerned about generative AI. So obviously you don't really need that world concept. Yeah, you have to serve your customers.
Yeah, that brings up an important point: is how do these firms, especially Gartner, make decisions about what they cover? It's based on the questions they're getting from their clients. And remember, Gartner has thousands of CIO clients. If the CIOs wanted a common, coherent view of the market, Gartner would produce it. But the reality is that Gartner sells to a lot of different people within any particular enterprise. Originally, it was in the CIO's organization. Now it's across all the business functions post the acquisition of CEB. And so they're getting asked a lot of tactical questions. They're also getting asked a lot of big strategic questions about the direction of technology and such like that. But it's not, let's have an uber view of the entire technology market. So I think that's important to remember, that if something's not being covered, and remember, not even Gartner or an IDC, who each have thousands of analysts, can cover everything. So they're focusing on those questions or those coverages that are most of concern to their clients, to their end user clients, especially for Gartner. So the next question, I'll start with this one, and I'll turn it over to you, Duncan. How can the almost monopoly of Gartner research be avoided for the sake of the market? And actually, I addressed this specific question at the 2019 AR Insights Architect User Conference, where I gave the keynote on, hey, how can we break up, Gartner's death grip on the research or on influence? And my basic point there was, it's up to the vendors. You've got to seek out other sources of research. And I'll just give an example here. MGI Research does a great job on doing research around the monetization platform. And so subscription, CPG or configure price quote, revenue recognition management, such like that. And so if the vendors in that space wanted to make sure that Gartner doesn't have a monopoly on influence, well, what you start doing is doing less reprints of Gartner research in these areas and promoting MGI's research more. Help them increase their visibility through reprints, through using their analysts for your webinars and such like that, using their quotes in your press releases and such like that. So part of Gartner's research, or part of Gartner's great strengths from Gartner's point of view, is that the Magic Quadrant is magic. It's magic for Gartner because we, the vendor community, are paying Gartner to do their brand building. So if we want to avoid the almost monopoly issue, we can start by just promoting different analysts and making sure their voices get heard. Duncan?
Yeah, I think it also just needs to be said, Gartner doesn't have a monopoly, right? I mean, it has something like a monopoly of vendor spending on licensed content. Right? But if you look at the way that technology is consumed by people in the enterprise, Gartner has absolutely nothing like a monopoly. That's just not the case. But what it is doing is it's doing a better job than its competitors of extracting the value that it is creating. And I think Carter's chart earlier on shows that there's no magic there. It's just about hiring salespeople. And if you look at Gartner's performance is excellent. But actually, if you look at some of the mid-sized and smaller analyst firms, I mean, they're not doing too differently in terms of revenue per salesperson when you correct that for the quality and tenure of the salesperson. You know, I as a former analyst, I don't want to say that the quality of the analyst doesn't really matter, but between you and me, right? I mean, it's the quality of the salespeople that matters more. And to turn that monopoly around, what has to happen is analyst relations teams need to be able to get a more accurate, more nuanced idea of which analyst firms are being used in their target audiences, and then start to reallocate their budgets with that. That's how the vendors do it. But the key to that is to realize Gartner doesn't have a monopoly on your target audience. Nothing like it. Yeah, most of the people who are reading a piece of analyst content in your target audience, the next time they pick up a piece of content, it won't be Gartner content. And so many analyst relations people just don't believe that because they don't have numbers from their own target audience to prove it.
Yeah, gathering the data around the sources of information and advice is so critical because it can help you not only avoid the mindset of Gartner has a monopoly, but it also helps you, reallocate your precious resources, primarily your spokespeople's time and customer references, to focus on the firms that are really relevant to your particular target market. What do you think, Duncan? 2024 and beyond, Magic Quadrant going up or down in influence?
I mean, the Magic Quadrant has been amazingly impactful. Obviously, more people are reading peer insights now than are reading Magic Quadrants. But I don't think that influence is a zero-sum game. Yeah, we're seeing huge changes in the way that buying centers operate. Partly because of the way that we've got more hybrid working. Okay, there's a certain turn away from that, but generally much more hybrid working, more distributed information centers in organizations that are feeding into buying centers in organizations. People who are familiar with Hank Barnes's research at Gartner are familiar with this kind of pie diagram that shows where buyers get their information from. Half of it comes from their colleagues and from inside the organization, half of it comes from the exterior, and the portions between that are shifting over time. If buying centers are more distributed, if they are spending less time speaking with each other, if they've got less time to make their decision, if they're under more pressure to produce better documented, better evidenced recommendations, then actually that external source of information becomes more important. So what the data shows is that buyers are using more Magic Quadrants, more reviews, more everything. Right? There's just more of everything that is becoming more influential. But the impact of these written reports, I think, is changing because of the way that vendors are coming into the sales cycle much later in the sales cycle now. So in terms of influence on long lists, things like the Magic Quadrant are gaining much more information. Basically, any content that is being licensed or is freely available, that is going to gain an influence on buying centers.
Yeah, I do not believe that the MQ is losing influence. It might not be significantly gaining influence, but it is so entrenched in the minds of IT buyers, and so that its influence will not decrease for the foreseeable future. What is your take on the need for analyst firms, and what should tech buyers consider when looking at Gartner versus Forrester? The analyst firms obviously provide real value to their clients. Otherwise, Gartner wouldn't be a $6 billion company. Overall, and that's revenues in 2023, including advisory, events, and consulting. And so obviously they deliver a lot of value. And why do the technology buyers turn to the analyst firms? It's not just give me a short list. It's like, what are the risks associated with these particular vendors? What should I be budgeting for next year? Hey, generative AI, I don't know. Should I be concerned? Gartner back in March, and this is only like 4 months after OpenAI released ChatGPT. Back in March, Gartner had already gotten over 20,000 inquiries. Why? Because there were a lot of questions around generative AI. And so, they called up the Gartner and said, hey, need to talk to an analyst about generative AI and whether I should be concerned. So there is a real need for the analyst firms. And what should tech buyers consider when looking at firms, not just Gartner versus Forrester, but Nucleus Research with their ROI capabilities, or again, my favorite example is MGI and monetization platforms and such like that. It's like, what your technology needs, what are your company's strategy, and which of the analyst firms cover that? Because again, not every firm can cover every topic. So maybe for a lot of the user experience stuff, you might turn to a Forrester. But if you're looking at enterprise applications to run your company, then you're probably going to turn to Gartner. But again, remember, there are many, many, many analyst firms out there, from single practitioners to specialty to boutiques. And so tech buyers should be evaluating the firms based on the company's needs, not just who has the biggest name in the marketplace.
Yeah, totally. I'd say analyst firms are all over the tech buying cycle. I mean, absolutely every single point in the tech buying cycle is saturated with analyst influence. And there are other influencers in the tech buying cycle, but the difference is industry analysts are the only influencer that is absolutely saturating influence at every point in the sales cycle. So they're not going away because they're an authoritative third party that can be trusted. And again, thinking back to the analyst value survey, I mean, they ask people how independent the analyst firms are that they are using from those firms' commercial interactions. And buyers have got a perfect sense of smell when it comes to which of these analysts are more in the pockets of the vendors and which are not. So I don't really think that tech buyers are really looking at Gartner versus Forrester. I mean, again, most of these people are not involved in deciding whether or not to buy from Gartner or Forrester. They either have access or they don't have access. They're not really involved in that decision. They're looking for relevant insights, and that is what they are looking for. And a huge part of whether they find that insight is whether the vendor community is amplifying them or whether it's amplifying other people instead.
So let's get to a Forrester. A lot of questions on Forrester, split it across 2 different slides. What is Forrester's influence in the market? Question is, which market? Again, Forrester has a smaller number of analysts since the acquisition of SiriusDecisions, and some people snark the SiriusDecisions takeover of Forrester because of all the movement toward Forrester decisions and more of the emphasis on marketing technologies, Salesforce execution, etc. Less emphasis on some of the other topics. So again, it's like, it just depends on the market. Totally. And I think that you actually, you had pinged the Forrester people, Duncan, about which markets they're focused on.
Yeah.
Can you review that list really quickly?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, there are some areas where I'd say that Forrester is definitely gaining ground, according to what we're hearing from people there. Carter's referred to this huge pivot of them towards Gen AI, And obviously that's been a major concern for CIOs and CISOs in a very wide range of organizations. And then also because of the way that they have that role-based function, I think they're very well placed in the area of those roles to help align IT change and business change, business growth, business restructuring. There are a number of tech decision of Forrester decision services, but it's really the ones that are oriented towards the tech buyer, where Forrester seems to have been able to defend and extend its beachhead. So with technology architects, with tech delivery, with tech executives, with security and risk, we're definitely seeing more interest in these hour-long advisory sessions that they're doing, which are really opportunities to work through playbooks and decision-making challenges that they have. And of course, the Gen AI tool that they have, Isola, has got an impact. What we're seeing is the role-based research is being most valued by people at the director level and above. Something like 70% of the people with Forrester decision seats are at that level. They are pivoting. I think some people would say maybe pivoting too much, but the role-based approach allows them to pivot towards people's concerns. And those technology areas that I mentioned earlier, security and risk, and then many of the technology areas that are really the serious decisions, the kind of legacy serious decisions areas, customer experience, marketing technology, customer insights, revenue engine optimization. These are definitely areas where we're seeing Forrester maintaining and extending its audience. But a lot of that audience it struggles to monetize. 3 million research views, right? 300,000 media citations every year. These are impressive numbers, but if it's cutting its sales team, it's going to struggle to sustain the research engine that it needs to be able to maintain its influence in the market.
And this also partially addresses the second bullet question about, if most of the influence comes from Gartner, why should I bother with Forrester? It depends on the market. It depends on the role. And so that's why, you'll hear this from us over and over again. Talk to your prospects, talk to your customers. Where do they get their information from? Where do they get their advice from? You will find some organizations or some specific technology issues. Hey, Forrester's the #1 analyst firm. We go with them. And others, it's like, Forrester who? And so that's why you need to have your finger on the pulse of what your buyers are up to. Let's go ahead and switch. It's already about 13 minutes until the top of the hour. And so let's just go through and just do maybe one, bullet per set of questions, because we still have a lot of categories to go through. Is Forrester cutting back on technical analysts due to financial pressure? I personally don't see any evidence of that. They're cutting back on their sales reps as they restructure their sales organization. But I have personally not heard of any analysts that got laid off in 2023. Now, this could change. I don't think so, because they have a very small analyst team to begin with. And they just don't have, the ability to cut, especially if they're going to start doing 15 to 20% of their research in generative AI. So I don't think they're cutting back. What do you think, Duncan?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And frankly, I think it would be a very wise decision if they did cut back in order to hire more salespeople, but that's a different opinion, and no one's going to like that.
Yeah, and frankly, Forrester is sitting on $124 million of cash and cash equivalents. They could hire all the salespeople and analysts they wanted to if George only wanted to grow the business. So some questions that matter the most for AR. So again, we'll go into a little bit more of and these are just fantastic questions. How can this change providers' relationships with Forrester and Gartner? First one on the price increases. Guess what? Gartner has increased its prices every year except for one, 2009, since Gene Hall took over in 2004. Yeah, there'll be price increases. And both firms appear to be on a downward cycle with regard to vendor support, but continue to raise contract prices. And the reason why the downward cycle has nothing to do with prices. Vendors have just across the board been laying off people. Every day in the press, we see about another 1,000 people being laid off from this vendor or 10,000 from that vendor. It's just because of the macroeconomic environment and Wall Street wanting the vendors to be more profitable. As soon as things pick up, they'll start buying more from Gartner, Forrester, and the other analyst firms. Anything you want to talk about here, Duncan?
Nothing imaginably will stop Forrester and Gartner from increasing their prices. They are incumbents, so yeah, by definition, that's what incumbents do. Yeah, they benefit from price elasticity.
Let's see. Is there other firms we should rally behind to fan the flames of influence? Absolutely. There are, there's this concept that we came up with the SageCircle over a decade ago that's still very relevant called the fog of influence. And it's not just the analysts, it's the advisory sites, it's the marketing consultant or the technology consultants, the systems integrators. There are many different forms of influence here. And again, as we said earlier, it's up to the vendors to give other analyst firms visibility. So find the analyst firms that are relevant to your space, and then support them to help increase their influence. Okay. What makes the analyst firm stop from thinking about smaller businesses? They don't have the money. They're not going to buy analyst research when their entire, analyst or their entire IT budget's $1 million. It's just not cost effective. But they turn to the reprints. They turn to the review sites. So SMBs completely change the dynamics of who is influential and who is not. Okay, either one of these you want to take, Duncan?
I mean, review platforms are definitely very influential. Earlier on, I mentioned that peer reviews is getting more eyeballs than Magic Quadrants. Buyers want information that is relevant to them, so they love reviews. At the same time, they need to pass the smell test. Many buyers are skeptical about reviews for the same reason that many analysts are skeptical about reviews, and frankly, the reason why many of you are probably skeptical about reviews. Vendors put a lot of effort into stimulating the production of favorable reviews, and the signal to noise ratio is a little bit problematic with them. But clearly, there's a lot of potential there, and in particular for innovative business models. You look at the way that G2, for example, has pivoted from being a reviews-led business to basically increasingly being something like a traditional kind of connoisseurial research firm that is being informed by these insights. And the way that we're seeing more analyst firms making arrangements with organizations that are curating reviews. We just saw TechTarget announce a deal like that with, I think it was G2 yesterday. That is going to have an impact. The key thing there is to think about monetization, right? What can be done to help analyst firms to monetize any kind of additional analysis or insight they can layer on top of these reviews to help reviewers to make sense of them rather than having to plow through these reviews. That can allow these second, third tier analyst firms to build up a business model where they can turn these reviews into insightful content that is useful for the kind of buyer personas that you want to target with. Find that data, find those analysts, shift your spending away from Gartner, Forrester, and IDC if you want to have more plurality in the choices available to you. That's the only way you'll get more favorable pricing.
Now, how do you prove value to executive leadership? Great question. Could be an entirely new webinar we should think about doing. But one of my favorite ways to show the value of the analysts in terms of the value of analyst relations to the organization is by showing the influence of the analysts. So if you do things like do a reprint, make sure the reprint is behind the paywall, so that people have to put in their contact information to get access to the reprint. And that way you can start tracking them. Let's say if you have Marketo, from the top of the funnel, they come in through a request for an analyst reprint and followed all the way down. And that'll give you some hard numbers in terms of the influence on deals or how they contribute to deals. Again, the win-loss analysis, which analysts are influencing which deals. Talking to your sales reps and training your sales reps through the sales enablement program to be asking prospects on a continuous basis. Are you talking to the analysts? Which ones? And getting, from the folks where the rubber hits the road, to use one of my favorite cliches, is what are the sales reps hearing about the influence of the analysts? I used to get calls all the time from the sales reps saying, what are you going to do about Gartner and how we ended up on the Magic Quadrant? I'm losing a deal because of that. And I'm going like, okay, well, that's a data point.
And Carter, I just add to that, earlier on I mentioned the analyst value survey. So the value of surveying your customers is incredibly profound because that gives you data that your executives will love. If one thing that we're prepared to do at SageCircle as a complimentary service for any vendor who wants it is to give a custom survey link you can send out to your customers and prospects, and then we'll segment that data to show which firms are used by the people who are buying from you and what are used by the prospects who've not bought from you. And that gives you some great insight into the firms that are being used and also which firms are accelerating you in the sales cycle and which firms are decelerating you in the sales cycle.
We're almost an hour in. We've only got a couple of minutes left, but we still have over 100 attendees. So it just shows the interest of the community in these topics. These are some hypothetical questions, but the one that I want us to talk about is how can analyst firms take on the big boys? And frankly, it's don't try to go against a Gartner or an IDC or a Forrester or even emergingly Omdia head on. Look for your niche. Become really good on a particular part of technology, especially a technology that the other analyst firms are not focusing on. Because this is top of mind for me from my former employer, Zuora. If you look at monetization platforms, subscription management, CPG, revenue recognition, etc. All those segments of the subscription management or the monetization markets. Gartner's got a couple of magic quadrants, but not across the board. Forrester's got one, and they just had a CPQ. IDC has more coverage, but they don't have any end users, so they're not doing direct influence. It's just from a reprint point of view. But a boutique firm like an MGI Research that focuses only on this space and covers it comprehensively, they're being very successful. So again, by focusing on what the big analyst firms are not focusing on and really driving depth of knowledge and understanding, that's how they can compete.
Yeah, I would just add to that, add more salespeople. Good salespeople will stop trying to sell your research and start trying to sell solutions for the problems that are troubling the people that you're trying to sell to. In particular, vendors are coming later and later into the sales cycle. They need more and more insight to help them to accelerate their sales pipeline and to get more leads into the sales pipeline. Basically, analyst firms have to become content marketing agencies and understand how to do this. I just want to draw attention to this little barcode here and the AR bottlenecks bit.ly link here. please do register for our webinar on the 29th. Also, we just got a pile of questions, Carter, that we couldn't answer. Maybe we should organize a second run round of this, you know, with you, with other people who've got opinions on this, and try to go through some of these questions in a little bit more detail than we could do today. I
think that's a great idea, and no doubt there'll be future questions that'll be, you know, coming at us. And I'm not one of the presenters in solving the 5 key AR bottlenecks. However, I've already registered for it because I think it's going to be a great discussion, and I'm going to be interested to be on this side of the screen, listening and taking in all this good information from Ian and from Duncan. So I highly recommend everybody sign up for this particular next webinar. Thank you, Duncan. Thank you, everybody, for participating today. Again, it's amazing how many people were still here at the very end of the webinar. Thank you for that. And let us know about any future questions or topics you would like for us to address, either in terms of webinars or in LinkedIn posts. I'm already working on a couple of other LinkedIn posts, even as we speak. Duncan, last thoughts, and then we'll just wrap up.
Just about the replay, if you've got a Microsoft account or a Microsoft Teams client, pretty much as soon as this webinar ends, the replay will be there, and you can come back in anytime for the next few weeks and get the replay. It will also be on the SageCircle website, so if you register for a free account there, you'll be able to get access to the replay there. Thank you so much for your time and for your questions. This was amazing. Hugely enjoyed it. Carter, I couldn't have done this without you. Thank you so much for coming along with all of your insights.
Thank you, Duncan, and everybody have a great rest of your day. Bye.
Thank you. Cheers. Bye-bye.